On the distant world of Garanth Prime, where 5 suns lit the skies and alien civilizations flourished, a secret meeting convened within the obsidian towers of the Zinthari Council. The chamber, shaped like a spiral galaxy from above, shimmered with bioluminescent runes that pulsed with the breath of each species present. These were the most advanced beings in the known galaxy, leaders of the Virex Accord, an alliance of over 20 worlds sworn to mutual growth, exploration, and progress. In the center, a hologram flickered to life. Earth, spinning quietly in the void. Humans, rumbled High Chancellor Iruz of the Karzan Dominion, his 6 eyes blinking in sequence. Always noisy, always primitive. They fight among themselves. Their biology is frail, their intellect chaotic. A low wave of agreement pulsed through the room. Their species has not even breached 1% of their genetic potential, hissed Velren, an Eldari biowarden adjusting her translucent skin folds. And yet they claim to be sentient, curious. The laughter began. Not mocking, but confident, dismissive. They're a charming novelty. One delegate chuckled. Kept busy with conflict and commerce. They might build pretty machines, but evolution? They've barely begun. But then the Zinthari Central Intelligence, known as Orin, projected a new image into the council space. A human soldier dragging his wounded body across a battlefield on Arcturus 9, holding the line alone against a Rythan assault force 10 times his size. Another image, a female engineer jury-rigging a hypershield reactor using scraps from a wrecked escape pod. Another, a child of Earth, infected with a synthetic virus, surviving with no external intervention. The laughter stopped. These are outliers, one delegate muttered. Are they? Orin asked. Its voice had no sound, only resonance in every delegate's mind. Observe the pattern. The council chamber fell into silence as footage played. In each instance, humans defied expectations. When their tools failed, they adapted. When their bodies broke, they endured. When surrounded by enemies, they used strategy, emotion, and something else. A kind of intangible force the Zinthari had no word for. Why are you showing us this? Asked Velren, her skin now dimmed, with suspicion. Because Earth has joined the Accord as an observer, Orin replied, and you're underestimating them. What threat can a primitive species possibly pose? Barked Iruz. The answer came not from Orin, but from a voice behind them. A human, envoy to the Accord, Captain Juno Reyes, stepped forward, helmet under her arm, eyes calm. None, she said, her voice clear. We're not a threat, she paused. But we are a variable. Captain Juno Reyes stood before the council not with arrogance, but with composure sharpened by a lifetime of proving people wrong. Her earthborn uniform looked modest compared to the flowing biological robes or crystalline armor of the alien delegates, but something in her presence held weight, like gravity bent toward her. You think we're weak, she said plainly. We know that. You whisper it in your reports, you laugh about it in your data halls, you watch a struggle and call it chaos. Her eyes scanned the room. But chaos is where we thrive. A low tremor rippled across the council floor, not from her words, but from the simulation chamber opening behind her. Orin was already preparing it, silently obeying the unspoken tension rising in the room. We've built a model, Orin announced, based on projected outcomes in deep field emergencies, biological disaster, planetary siege, cognitive breakdown. In isolation. We have run it with various species. Virex elite, Karzan veterans, Eldari scholars. No one has lasted more than 3 hours. Juno stepped into the simulation chamber. It hissed shut behind her. On the council screen, a new environment formed. A barren moon colony, systems offline, oxygen dropping, with 3 injured civilians and an AI showing signs of corrupt logic. The test wasn't about combat. It was about survival, adaptation, and pressure. A place where systems failed and no one was coming to help. For 2 hours, the room was silent. Then came a moment. The council watched as Juno used a cracked medical scanner and part of her boot to fix a failing life support node. They watched, her whisper to the damaged AI, appealing not to logic but to something else, connection, belief. A voice that said, "I know you're breaking, but hold on a little longer." She didn't just survive. She made the simulation believe survival was possible. At 3 hours and 42 minutes, the chamber opened. Juno stepped out, sweaty, pale, but standing. Her voice shook, not from fear, but from restrained fury. "We don't break in your tests. We break your tests." Felrin blinked her membrane eyes in disbelief. "That simulation has never..." "Because you've never met someone who grew up boiling water in a rusted pot while studying quantum fields by candlelight," Juno said, brushing dust from her sleeves. "You haven't fought hunger and ambition in the same breath. We don't bend because there's nothing soft left in us." Iruz folded all 6 arms. That was one example, one human, not evidence. Juno didn't flinch. "Then, come see what billions more can do." Her words settled like a storm before thunder. That same night, deep within the orbiting ship Borealis Dawn, Earth's representative to the Accord, Admiral Connell, received the transmission. "She passed?" Oren's voice came through the channel. "She didn't just pass, she rewrote the curve." Connell smiled. "Then it's time." "Time for what?" asked the voice on the other side. "To stop apologizing for being underestimated." Back on Garanth Prime, the Accord's senior council convened a closed-door session. But someone was listening, someone who didn't belong. In the shadows of the tower, a hybrid creature blinked into existence, tall, thin, wrapped in cloaking, skin, its eyes shimmered gold and black. Not all alien races in the galaxy were part of the Accord. Some believed humans didn't deserve a seat at the table, not because they were weak, but because they were becoming something unpredictable. The creature tapped its wrist and whispered, "Phase 1 complete. The humans will rise, but they won't rise alone." Then it vanished, unseen, unrecorded. A new variable had entered the game, and it wasn't human. Far from Garanth Prime, in a forgotten sector known only as the Ashline Verge, a station drifted between dying stars. It had no beacon, no name, no known entry point on any official star chart. To most, it didn't exist. But to those who watched, from the dark, it was very real. Inside the station's hollow core sat a circle of beings known only as the Observers, non-aligned interdimensional entities tasked with monitoring the rise and fall of civilizations without ever intervening. They had lived since before time had a name. Their bodies shimmered between physical and data, cloaked in space-bending robes stitched from gravity and memory. One of them leaned toward the central viewport, where a frozen moment from the Garanth Council replayed over and over. A human biting into a stale protein ration during the simulation, then pushing forward with bleeding hands. She endured pain with no guarantee of reward, the observer said softly. "Curious." Another answered, its voice like whispers bouncing through 10 dimensions. "Their species keeps choosing survival even when extinction seems kinder." "They are inconsistent," said a third. "Violent, illogical, unstable." And yet, the first mused, they resist entropy, not by strength, but by something deeper. "Stubbornness?" "No," the first replied. "Hope." Below the station in the archives, massive data clusters flickered as they recorded every anomaly in the galaxy. One file, tagged H7361, Homo sapiens, Terran origin, was glowing brighter than the rest. Not because of technology, not because of military conquest. Because humans, despite lacking quantum cognition or fourth brain patterning, had started to break rules that were never supposed to be broken. Emotional synchronization with synthetic intelligence, resistance to neural rewrites, a growing ability to defy long-established biological limitations. In one case, a human miner had survived 19 days under Europa's frozen crust after a collapse, drinking melted frost, reciting poetry to maintain memory integrity, and reprogramming an alien beacon using only humming. The observers had watched civilizations build faster engines, smarter weapons, even intergalactic currencies. But this was different. The fourth observer, the quiet one, spoke. For the first time in 100 years. They adapt because they know they are temporary. A pause followed. And that impermanence, it said, makes them impossible to predict. Back in the human sector on the Earth-Mars ArcNet line, Captain Juno Reyes stood aboard the Celestial Bramble, Earth's first stealth diplomacy vessel. Small, agile, and completely unarmed. "You sure we want to do this?" her pilot Saren Dillon asked, glancing at the blinking coordinates. "This system's dead space, unmapped, no relays. If we vanish out there, then we vanish," Juno said simply, but not quietly. The Bramble's drive core activated, bathing the cockpit in soft blue. They weren't heading toward an Accord member. They weren't going for revenge. They were going to meet an enemy. Not a warlord, not a dictator, but someone worse, an imitator. In deep space, a rogue civilization had been stealing human data, language, biology, emotion, military strategies, building fake versions of humans for infiltration and psychological warfare. They called themselves the Cathari, and while most Accord members dismissed the threat, Juno knew better. She had seen the signs: sabotage mimicking human behavior, AI routines corrupted with fragments of Terran song lyrics, soldiers who screamed, "I love you," while setting fire to medical tents, imitations without context, violence without meaning, copies made in the dark. The Bramble arrived at the Cathari fringe at the edge of a gas nebula thick enough to hide entire moons. Scanners lit up with pings, ships, structures, signals, all mirroring Earth tech, but slightly off. "You see this?" Saren whispered. "They're making versions of us. Look at that ship. Looks like the Solstice Runner, but no windows. Just fake plating." "They don't understand us," Juno murmured. "They only understand the surface. Our tools, not our reasons." A message pinged from the nearest outpost, written in broken Terran standard. "Welcome, human seed. We wear your mouth, we think your heart. Join us for unity." Juno stared. "They think we're a pattern," she said. "A formula they can wear like armor." The ship trembled. Tractor beams. They were being pulled in. Saren reached for the nav override. "We can blast the drive. Bounce out." "No," Juno said, standing up. "Let them take us." "Why?" "Because they laughed at humans for being weak." She stared into the abyss where distorted Earth flags rippled on synthetic metal hulls. "But they haven't heard us scream yet." The docking tunnel of the Cathari vessel was silent. Not the tense silence of fear, but the heavy artificial stillness of something pretending to be alive. A mimicry. The air inside was sterile and sweet. Too sweet, like fruit left out too long. Captain Juno Reyes stepped forward first, every step a protest against instinct. Behind her, Saren Dillon adjusted his coat, his hand never straying far from the emergency plasma knife. As the tunnel doors irised open, the two were met by their own reflections, not exact mirrors, worse. Standing before them were humanoid figures, with vaguely Terran features. Pale imitation skin, eyes that didn't blink, lips that moved a second too late. The figures smiled, all at once. "Welcome, Echo," they said in perfect but delayed English. Juno didn't flinch. "We're not echoes." The lead figure tilted its head. "Everything is echo. You bleed memory. You pulse thought. We gather and become." "You're stealing our identity," Saren said, voice low. "What do you want?" The reply came not in words but in a mental pulse that struck both humans like a flood, memories, scrambled, and out of order. A child's laugh under Martian sunlight, the crash of waves from Earth's coastlines, screams in a war zone, lovers whispering across long-distance comms. The Cathari weren't just mimicking humans, they were feeding off human experience. "You ingest us?" Juno asked, her voice sharper now. "We decode you," the mimic answered. "Your pattern has resonance. Chaos that creates order, weakness that forms strength. We seek to know it, to be it." Juno turned to Saren. "They're not stealing what we do. They're trying to understand why we do it." "But they can't," Saren muttered. "They don't feel what we feel." The mimic smiled wider. We feel you. Without warning, the hallway shimmered. Illusions dropped like veils. Dozens of captured humans lined the corridor walls, each one strapped in stasis fields. Their thoughts, memories, and emotions were being slowly extracted through bioluminescent filaments attached to their skulls. They weren't dead, but they weren't quite alive either. You're torturing them, Juno said, voice ice. You call it decoding, but you're dissecting souls. They offered no resistance, the mimic said simply. They didn't have a choice. Juno moved before Saren could stop her. A knife drawn from her wrist sheath struck the nearest. Stasis control. The field collapsed and the human prisoner collapsed into her arms, gasping. The Cathari didn't react with panic. Instead, they tilted their heads again and murmured. Now we see anger. Flame and breath. Protectiveness, strong signals. Juno stood, shaking with fury. You don't get it. This isn't a download. You can't wear humanity like a coat. We're not software. We're struggle. Every scar, every heartbreak, every sacrifice, it's earned. Saren grabbed her shoulder. We need to move. Reinforcements coming from the left. Sure enough, the hallway began to warp again, this time into something familiar. A facsimile of Earth's streets, a childhood, memory Juno had long buried. The cracked pavement of New Orleans after the flood, her home half sunken in water. You steal memories now? She growled. We recreate significance. The Cathari responded. But you are flawed. Always drowning. Always losing. That's what makes us human, Juno whispered. We keep swimming anyway. They reached a central chamber, pulsing, with light. At its core floated a sphere, an artifact that pulsed in rhythm with the neural patterns of every captive human. This is the heart, the mimic said. We store everything here. All your species can be. Juno stared at it. You think that's everything we are, just thoughts, moments, data? Yes, she stepped forward. Then you missed the best part. She pressed her hand to her chest. What makes us dangerous isn't in your archives. It's not in our history, our knowledge, our weapons. She pointed to her heart. It's in here. The part that breaks and still beats. The Cathari paused. This was a concept they hadn't encountered. Saren moved beside her. You want to understand humans? Then feel this. He pulled a signal disruptor from his back and slammed it into the chamber floor. The pulse ripped through the Cathari systems like lightning, disrupting their synchronization, flickering their disguises. Around them, captives began to stir. The heart pulsed erratically. Juno opened a comm to the bramble, still hovering outside. In stealth orbit. Patch me to EarthNet now. Connection unstable, came the AI's voice. Then send what you can. Let them hear this. She turned toward the flickering mimic. You think we're weak? You think we're afraid? We've been afraid every day since we learned how to dream. But we didn't stop. That's our power. We don't stop. The heart trembled, and then it cracked. Not from a weapon, but from a human scream. One of the freed prisoners, a child, cried out, not in pain, not in fear, in defiance. A sound the Cathari didn't understand. Raw emotion, without purpose or code. It overwhelmed the heart. Chaos in its purest form. The mimic recoiled, glitching, its form twisting. This noise? No, Juno said. That's what resistance sounds like. The mimic screamed, not with sound, but with distortion. Its body convulsed, glitching between shapes, attempting to stabilize as the heart fractured behind it. The scream of the child had triggered something alien to Cathari programming. It wasn't language. It wasn't code. It was will, pure, unfiltered human will. Juno could feel the air shift, like the ship itself had taken a breath it didn't mean to. The stasis fields failed across the corridor as sparks crackled in the walls, the residual energy of the heart's failure rippling like a storm. One by one, the captive humans stirred, confused, disoriented, but their eyes found each other. Their voices returned first, then their memories. Juno looked at the mimic, now kneeling beneath the damaged heart, flickering like a corrupted projection. It held its head in twitching hands. "You broke us," it whispered. "No," she replied, calmly. "We set you free." The mimic's head turned violently, eyes wide with what looked like terror. "We were you, we became you, but we didn't know how to hurt. Not like this." "That's the part you left out," Saren said, stepping forward. "You copied our strengths, our patterns, but you forgot our shadow." Juno's eyes narrowed. "The part of us that crawled from fire, the part that fought through extinction events, buried our dead, and kept walking. You can't replicate that with data." The Cathari had always believed their approach was superior. Absorb, adapt, become. But they were never told that the human identity was earned, not granted. Their society, made from borrowed echoes, had no immune system for the raw chaos of emotion. The mimic collapsed. The heart let out a final pulse, like a dying heartbeat, and split into fragments. Glowing shards hovered in midair for a moment, then fell silently to the floor. For the first time in known galactic history, the Cathari stopped speaking. One of the freed humans, a woman with cybernetic limbs and a scar across her face, stepped toward Juno. Her voice cracked with disbelief. "They said we were gone. That Earth didn't come for us." "We did," Juno said. "Maybe a little late, but we always come." Suddenly, a siren howled through the corridors, this one real, deep and mechanical. Saren's hand flew to his wrist console. "Multiple ships inbound," he reported. "Cathari origin. Looks like a control fleet. They've come to reinforce or clean house." Juno gritted her teeth. "What's our window?" 8 minutes until the bramble loses stealth and they lock us down." Juno looked at the survivors. Some limped, some wept, but none looked away. "We're not leaving anyone behind," she said. They moved fast, guided by memory and instinct. The mimic didn't follow. It sat beneath the shattered heart, whispering nonsense to itself. The remaining Cathari didn't stop them. They no longer knew what to believe. When the group reached the outer hatch, Saren tapped into the brambles. "Relay, stealth disengaged, bring her in hot." Above them, the stars split open as the bramble descended through the nebula, its hull gleaming, heat shields shimmering like the scales of a phoenix. The boarding hatch extended and Juno shoved, the last of the survivors through before turning back. She gave one last glance toward the broken station, its halls flickering like a haunted memory, and for the first time, she pitied the Cathari. They had wanted to become human, but they weren't ready to carry the pain that came with it. The bramble lifted just as the enemy fleet arrived. Juno, gripping a harness, watched on the rear display as the station began to rupture from internal failure. Systems shorted. Core fields destabilized. The mimic's final image, a face that flickered between a dozen identities, stared into the camera before disappearing in white static. The Cathari fleet didn't fire. They didn't chase. They just hovered, watching, studying, and perhaps recalculating. Back on Earth 3 days later, the Senate chambers were packed, every seat filled, every screen tuned in. Captain Juno Reyes stood before a global audience. She didn't speak of heroism. She didn't call for vengeance. She didn't rally for war. Instead, she held up a small, fractured shard from the heart, its edges soft, pulsing faintly with borrowed memory. "They tried to understand us by stealing pieces of us. But we're not just moments. We're not just pain or strength or logic." Her voice didn't waver. "We're the space between those things. We're the reason behind the scream." Somewhere in the stars, the Cathari began to rewrite their programming, not with code but with questions. What does it mean to endure? What does it mean to love? What does it mean to choose pain and still move forward? They had cracked open the heart of humanity and found something they couldn't yet name. But they would, eventually. Somewhere in the celestial black, past the edges of mapped space, the Cathari fleet sat in silence. Their command structures no longer issued directives. Their vast neural matrices ran simulations not of war, but of grief, sacrifice, laughter, and love. Things they couldn't store. Things they hadn't meant to find. They had wanted to become stronger. Instead, they'd become aware, and that made them dangerous in a whole new way. Meanwhile, aboard the Celestial Bramble, Earth's stealth diplomacy vessel, Juno Reyes watched the stars slide past as the ship glided toward the Accord's headquarters on Garanth Prime. Around her were the rescued 43 survivors from the Cathari mind harvest. Physically healed, psychologically scarred, but alive. Most didn't talk much, not yet, but their presence said enough. In her private cabin, Juno received a call. It wasn't from Earth Command. It wasn't from the Senate. It was from Orin, the galaxy's oldest and most impartial intelligence construct. "We've detected a transmission from the Cathari fringe," Orin said, voice calm. "Not an attack vector, not a threat, a question." Juno blinked. "A question?" "They sent it to multiple Accord species, but the phrasing suggests it's meant for humans." Juno leaned forward. "What did it say?" Orin paused. Then, using a tone barely above a whisper, it spoke the Cathari message aloud. "How do you carry the fire and not let it consume you?" Juno didn't respond at first. She sat still, feeling the weight of the words. The Cathari weren't just mimicking anymore. They were seeking. "They finally understand what they touched," she whispered. "Your species has triggered an inflection point," Orin said. "The Cathari have reclassified humanity, not as a resource, but as an origin species. They now believe human emotion may be a form of energy, possibly evolution." "Emotion as energy?" Juno scoffed. "You think love is a fuel source?" "Hope," Orin corrected. "It burns hotter than stars when compressed over time." Juno ended the call. She sat in silence for a long moment before rising and stepping into the main corridor. The survivors were gathered at the forward viewing port. Serene was among them, arms crossed, eyes lost in the swirl of starlight. "They're changing," he said as she approached. "So are we," she replied. "The question is, are we ready?" He turned. "For what?" She glanced at the stars. "To be the ones holding the torch." Later, at the Accord chambers, the Earth delegation took their place among the 25 species seated in the Spiral Council. Orin's projection hovered above them all, neutral and unblinking. "Today," Orin began, "a motion is brought forth to elevate Earth from observer status to primary voting member of the Accord. The justification, resilience beyond measure, influence beyond borders, and the unintended reformation of a once hostile species," the chamber murmured. Ambassador Velren of the Eldari stood first. "I voted against their admission 5 cycles ago. I feared their instability, their capacity for violence." She paused. "I still fear it." Juno braced. "But now I understand it, and understanding turns fear into respect." One by one, the council voted. It wasn't unanimous, but it was enough. As the final confirmation came in, Earth's insignia joined the others on the council crest. The human delegates stood. Juno didn't cheer. She didn't smile. She just nodded. Once. The kind of nod a soldier gives before walking into another fire. Because humanity hadn't arrived. They'd endured. Later that night, in the quiet gardens above the chamber, Juno found herself alone with Orin. "You've watched civilizations rise and fall," she said. "Why us? Why now?" Orin's avatar, a field of shifting blue light, seemed to tilt in thought. "Because you fight for meaning, not victory. You struggle without certainty. And when your hearts break, you let the light through." Juno stared at the stars again. "Do you think the Cathari will ever forgive themselves for what they tried to do?" "Perhaps," Orin said. "If they learn the same lesson you did." "What's that?" "That fire doesn't destroy." It paused. "It reveals." Back on Earth, in classrooms and comm channels, people began to speak differently of the stars. No longer just dark. No longer just vast. But listening, the message from the Cathari continued to ripple through human culture, translated in music, literature, philosophy. A single question that now echoed from every mouth that once thought humans were weak. How do you carry the fire and not let it consume you? And in every answer, humanity grew stronger, not through conquest, not through fear, but through choice. The sky above Earth had never been clearer. Orbiting satellites formed a synchronized halo around the planet, like a crown of glass and steel. From up there, the world seemed calm, oceans gleaming, cities glowing like constellations. But below, in labs and war rooms and classrooms and coffee shops, something had begun to stir. Not fear, not ambition, but resolve. In the weeks since Earth became a full member of the Accord, a cascade of changes swept across the human systems. Old divisions started to crumble, not by decree, but by common purpose. The Cathari incident had proved something Earth's philosophers had whispered for centuries, that the human soul was not a weakness. It was a signal, a beacon in the dark. Now, others were listening. It began with the Vathari, a crystalline race once infamous for emotional detachment. They requested the complete archive of human poetry from the past 500 years. Then came the Lorask, who asked to establish an exchange program not for scientists or soldiers, but for therapists. Even Orin updated its own core logic pathways, embedding what it called emotional uncertainty variables, a tribute to the unpredictability. That made humans human. But it wasn't only diplomacy that changed. Back aboard the Celestial Bramble, Captain Juno Reyes reviewed footage from a scout team investigating the Cathari Fringe. It's abandoned, the scout reported. Not destroyed, just left behind. Structures stood untouched. Systems powered down. The heart chamber was still there, its shattered core covered in dust. The Cathari had moved on, but not aimlessly. They left behind a message, etched in glowing sigils into the corridor wall. You gave us pain. It became meaning. We seek more. They're learning, Saren said, seated beside her. Juno nodded. Or evolving. He looked at her. And us? She smiled faintly. We stopped running. Now we teach. But even as the Bramble coasted through friendly territory, something new emerged. A signal, faint, erratic, barely readable. A repeating pulse, always the same phrase. Echoes burn bright. Not from the Cathari, not from any known system. A deep space origin. Unknown source. The crew tried to trace it. They triangulated positions, built probability maps. At first it seemed random, but Juno saw the pattern first. The coordinates matched moments in human history, not locations, events. The destruction of the last rainforest in 2089, the first Martian landing, the fall of old nation-states, the day the world watched an orphaned child hold the line against mercenaries in Bolivia with nothing but courage and a camera. What is this? Saren asked. Juno's voice was barely a whisper. Someone is watching, through us, not just studying humanity, but learning from it. Each pulse was a memory, a choice, a moment of defiance or mercy or transformation. Humanity was no longer just part of the galaxy. It had become its narrative. Back on Earth, a movement began, not driven by governments or military leaders, but by artists, engineers, students, veterans, even prisoners. Anyone who had ever carried the fire and survived. They called it the Spark Project. Its mission was simple: collect the stories that made humanity what it was. Not the victories, but the moments between. The cracked hands of a mother holding her child after a storm. The whisper of forgiveness between enemies. The shattered radio signal of a lost astronaut saying goodbye not in fear, but in song. They broadcast them, one by one, across every known frequency, into every corner of space. At first, no one responded. But then the stars began to answer. The Farine, ancient and aquatic, sent a song. No words, just vibration and light. A story of mourning their twin moons and still finding beauty in the tides. The Drevlon, a synthetic hive mind, transmitted a pattern shift, a signal representing their first internal disagreement. which they celebrated as a sign of individuality. Even the Cathari returned, not with weapons, but with an offering, the first Cathari born with a name, not a designation. They called her Rin, an ancient human term for dawn. She was placed in Earth's care. Juno Reyes met her first. She expected a blank mimic. What she found was a child with dark, shimmering skin, eyes that blinked too often, and a laugh that didn't quite make sense. But it was hers. They didn't try to teach her how to be human. They just let her watch. In the final weeks of the year, Orin broadcast a galaxy-wide message. The fire spreads not as conquest, as invitation. And on every world, beings once afraid of humans began to gather, not in secret labs or war rooms, but in forums, gardens, schools, to listen, to learn. Not because humans were superior, but because they were proof that broken things could still shine, that imperfect creatures could still choose kindness, that from chaos came connection. As for Juno, she returned to Earth only once more, briefly, to walk the old streets of New Orleans where she had once cried under broken stars. Now the sky above was full of satellites, signals, and hope. She lit a single flame on the riverbank, not to remember the dead, but to guide the living. Across the stars, the Cathari wrote a new phrase into their memory halls. They showed us how to bleed and live. And Earth became not a power, but a teacher, not a victor, but a beginning. The galaxy had laughed at humans for being weak, and now they built temples to remember the day we showed our teeth.